My name is Jonathan Granoff. I'm a fellow in the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, president of the Global Security Institute, and a representative to the United Nations of the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates. Leadership is the issue of the day, and leadership requires ideas commensurate with the challenges of the moment. In the present circumstances, the Secretary General of the United Nations addressed the General Assembly pursuant to a resolution highlighting the importance of human security. In 2013, he presented a comprehensive report on human security that highlighted human security as the interlocking principle of the three pillars of the United Nations system: human rights, peace and security, and development. In short, the report emphasized that human security comprehends in principle the right of all people to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair. All individuals, in particular vulnerable people, are entitled to freedom from fear and freedom from want, with an equal opportunity to enjoy all their rights and fully develop their human potential. That vision is what our duty is to put into practice. The report gives practical examples of successes and recommendations, which include the Secretary General promoting the mainstreaming of human security into all the activities of the United Nations system, considering human security as an overarching framework in the post-2015 development agenda known as the Sustainable Development Goals. That the member states of the United Nations give financial support to the very valuable work of the United Nations Trust Fund for Human Security, and that the Secretary General report every 2 years on progress in this agenda. From personal health to geopolitics, a human security approach does not diminish the value of other levels of governance, whether local or national. Working in a cooperative fashion to govern global concerns that impact the daily lives of everyone does not diminish national sovereignty. In fact, it is the only way for the first duty of the state to protect its citizens that can be fulfilled. Multilateral cooperation is the only way to fulfill the first duty of every nation. In fact, multinationalism, in a sense, is the mantra of human security. There must be a realistic proportionality that also recognizes that many challenges today, such as pandemics, protecting the climate, protecting the health of the oceans, cannot be addressed with a disproportionate emphasis on militarism and nationalism, but require global cooperation. A small portion of the enormous economic allocations for militaries-focused policies would be far better spent addressing the imperative to identify, affirm, and pursue our common interests and effectively achieve the cooperation in the political climate necessary to protect the natural world's climate, the health of the oceans, and the common good of public health. Pursuing security through threatening human annihilation is not as efficient, practical, or morally compelling as working cooperatively to achieve a sustainable and better quality of life for everyone. This should be self-evident, and I believe if the people of the world understood the integrated human security agenda, they would clamor to support it. This change to a human security approach will involve resource allocations to achieve the SDGs rather than enormous resource allocations to modernize and improve nuclear weapons. Today and tomorrow, we will be hearing from experts in numerous disciplines, and I suggest that implicit in all of them is a human security agenda. Whether we realize it or not, the human body functions in an integrated fashion where the health of the lungs is not separate from the health of the heart or the liver. Likewise, local, national, and global health are part of an integrated whole in today's world. The human security approach will not only enhance cooperation amongst nations, it will provide far more security within nations by addressing disrupting threats and freeing up intellectual, organizational, and economic resources needed to address real daily life human needs. This integral and comprehensive approach to security is capable of galvanizing the best of our humanity. It is both morally coherent, practically viable, and it is uplifting and inspiring rather than fear-driven. It has the possibility to galvanize public support, but it requires leadership. It requires leadership. We need leaders that realize that our planet is an integrated living system, that humanity is one species of life in a web of life, and that every single person is precious. Humanity is not a fragmented phenomena. We are social creatures, and in today's borderless world, we need leaders with borderless hearts. This is not a new call. This is a perennial call of wisdom. And I'll end by quoting a wise 13th century Persian poet, Sadi, who said, "Humanity is as one body. An injury to any part causes a healing response from the whole. O you who cannot feel the suffering of others, can you call yourselves truly human?" The human security agenda invokes our highest human qualities, compassion, caring, and service to others, and it requires leaders with that wisdom. I am very pleased to introduce our first speaker today, whose life's work has been an embodiment of bringing these principles into practice. Ambassador Yukio Takasu of Japan is presently the special advisor to the Secretary General and has been on the subject of human security since 2010. He has been both a public global servant, serving as the Assistant Secretary General and Controller of the United Nations, as well as having been the permanent representative of the nation of Japan to the United Nations. I just want to say that each of our speakers' bios, which are far more extensive than I wanted to spend our time, is in our literature package, and I am honored to turn the floor over to Ambassador Takasu. Please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Granoff, for your kind introduction and also strong support to human security. As advocate of human security for over more than 20 years, the first 10 years I was advocating human security, promoting from the representative of the Japanese government, which has been instrumental to make it a global operational concept. But last 10 years, I have been representing Secretary General, UN, to advocate this concept. So I'm delighted to participate in this conference. And first of all, I'd like to thank UN office in Geneva, but also World Academy or Academy of Arts and Science for this initiative, and particularly inviting me to speak about human security approach to peace building, because this is a session of human security and peace building, I understand. In considering human peace building, the interdependence of three pillars of UN activities, namely peace, development, human rights, cannot be overemphasized. As already Mr. Granoff, you mentioned, alluded, the report of Secretary General that I was responsible for preparing earlier to General Assembly. Obviously, durable and sustainable peace cannot be realized until economic activities are reactivated and daily livelihood of the people improved, and human rights are protected and minorities are also respected. These are challenges of peace building. Also, durable economic and social development cannot be realized until stable political and social order and productivity based on rule of law and sustainability of environment are assured. On the other hand, human rights and freedom are often breached when sustaining peace and development is not achieved. So while human rights are not respected and inclusive development not progressing, development cannot be sustainable for long term. So this way, peace, development, and human rights need to be pursued in parallel to achieve a peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous society. Such interconnected nexus is increasingly recognized, emphasized in UN, and integrated approach is called for. Emphasis on prevention and comprehensive approach to peace building is based on this recognition that ceasefire agreement could be elusive without further effort in economic and human rights fronts. So another fight will break out in a few years' time. This is repeated in many places, the failure of peace building. And Agenda 2030 with its Sustainable Development Goals is another important initiative founded on same recognition that peace and development and human rights must be pursued in parallel to realize sustainable development. So you cannot separate. However, fact is that given separate legislative bases, United Nations consists of many organs, entities, and offices that do their own work in the three pillars of activities. It's always challenging. I have spent so many years in UN system, in and out, to UN to work together, coordinate separate entities, transcending silos, such as security development divide, or humanitarian development divide, to divide collaborative effort together for joint purpose. So in my view, human security conference is extremely useful to unite this effort because it places people always at the center. This is a concept that provides a cross-sectoral, conceptual and programmatic thread overarching activities in peace and development and human rights. So in my view, a human security approach will always provide variable framework for UN entities, first of all, to work together for addressing interconnected challenges for peace building, but not only that, but SDGs, eliminate climate changes and disaster prevention and others. In my view, major contribution of human security is that it helped paradigm change in concept of security. First, vertically, and second, horizontally. Vertically, human security extends our understanding of security beyond the state toward people. It looks at the individual not as a part of aggregate group, country, or government. It aims at protecting and empowering every individual to develop the ability to protect to the extent possible. Thus, focus will be on the most vulnerable people so that no one will be left behind. Horizontally, this new paradigm recognized the importance of multiplicity of factors that were previously peripheral to national security and are threatening people's safety and survival, like pandemic, climate change, infectious diseases. These are center of security now threat. So it's underlined today's challenges are complex, multidimensional, and interrelated. Thus, human security enables a comprehensive approach and provide platform. I mentioned about partnership of UN system, but also partnership of stakeholders in private sector. This is the essence, I think, of this conference. Today, we can say that we have accumulated lesson learned for past 20 years, more than 20 years, for application by human security within UN, but also beyond UN. This concept is very much broadly supported, more strongly, I think, outside UN system, frankly speaking. That has contributed new way of thinking and responding complex challenges. In particular, I mentioned human security emphasis on context specific to meet needs of people is most relevant in peace building and sustainable peace because it helps examining and addressing root causes of conflict. Every conflict has a particular context and origin. So peace building will never succeed unless addressing to resolve root causes in a comprehensive manner. And human security approach to put always people at center is very useful. We have now crisis of COVID-19. It is a stark reminder that once black elephant, like unprepared pandemic hits, it will spread so quickly and so widely, causing irreparable damages on health and economy, but also every aspect of society. And however strong and however rich, no country alone can protect population effectively. So COVID-19 is causing, as you mentioned, disproportionately serious damage on the most vulnerable people, children, women, elderly, and people on move. And also distrust in institutional governance is growing at all levels. So facing such a global crisis, I think significance of human security approach focusing on most vulnerable people could not be clearer. So considering the intersection of these growing risks, we have climate emergency, human mobility, transnational crimes, digitalization, multilateralism based on global solidarity is more essential than ever before, as in opening session emphasized. But multilateralism often means cooperation for collective action among governments, along the UN. But it is more than that. Global challenge cannot be solved by UN or government alone. As you can see, climate change is one example. Pandemic is one example. We need multilateralism that goes beyond government, public sector. We need cooperation by business, civil society, and academia, because they possess knowledge, they possess expertise and human resources. So we need to develop solutions through partnership, going beyond the government, beyond the UN system that realize tangible improvement in safety, livelihood, and opportunities, and most important, dignity. This is the essence of dignity of people, vulnerable people. So in conclusion, I would say this is where human security can bring great value in helping forge a path forward to build back a better world. I believe now is the time to ensure the advancement of human security is essential to the achievement of security in various levels, national level, regional level, international level in this century. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And I want to highlight the outstanding report. I didn't realize that you had leaned in on that. And I'm going to post in our chat where it's available. It is document A/68685, which was essentially a follow-up on a General Assembly resolution calling on the Secretariat to provide such a report. It is not only comprehensive in addressing the principles of human security, but it's replete with examples of success and represents an enormous amount of very valuable research, and makes the case that that from the local to the global level, a human security paradigm is both morally compelling and practically possible. Otherwise, we face ongoing crises, one after another, and this is a perfect introduction to Ambassador Christian Dussey, who is the director of the Geneva Center for Security, because his background is in crisis management. He has enormous experience in addressing the attendant crises that arise from inadequate addressing to the underlying problems that human security seeks to address. Ambassador Dussey, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, global leadership in the new or next normal is not about fighting the problems. It's about together creating the solutions. Only together can we meet the exceptional and even daunting challenges that the world, humanity, and the planet are facing today as we speak. Let me start by congratulating the Office of the United Nations to Geneva, the World Academy of Arts and Science, and all the partner organizations, leading scientists, and extraordinary and committed individuals who have contributed to develop this timely report on what type of global or draft report yet on what types of global leadership is required in the 21st century. The draft report is thoughtful and insightful. It's visionary. Hard-hitting analysis and initial findings are both constructive and often very practical, actionable in its recommendations. So congratulations. The very process of this initiative is itself an excellent example of what effective and impactful global leadership in the 21st century requires. The draft report clearly articulates what urgently needs to be done in a range of areas. The need to redefine multilateralism, to strengthen the sustaining peace agenda and human security, to mobilize civil society, to generate new finance, to implement the sustainable development goals, and finally, to transform global education. I would like to comment on two angles from the draft report. First, as it relates to human security and peace building, and then second, building on the first point, how to operationalize the substantive findings of the report. That is, what type of human leadership is required to make the recommendation happen and sustaining peace possible. Because peace is about people. People make peace happen. As individuals, but even more effectively as individuals part of an inclusive, representative, empowered, and committed collective. So first, I noted the suggestion that it is time to debunk three myths. That security in the 21st century relies only on military power. That there is supposedly a shortage of money in the world. And finally, that we are trapped in scarcity thinking, when in fact, there is, as the draft report points out, an abundance of most things in the world. The problem lies in how we are conceptualizing, prioritizing, organizing, and dividing issues and responses. Building peace, positive peace, should be everybody's business. As the report points out, effective problem solving requires a much broader and more representative set of institutions, organizations, networks, and individuals. Future leadership is about recognizing the human potential in the human security context and give individuals powers and tools to create solutions for the new or next normal. The new leader is someone who is compassionate and understands that the solution can come from anywhere and anyone. To strengthen the human security and to build peace, to effectively lead in the 21st century, there needs to be a change of mindset. As defined in the document, leading needs to include a much broader mosaic of stakeholders at multiple levels, states, but also societies, communities, and even individuals around the world. We can choose whether to see it as a threat and liability, or together treat it as an asset and figure it out and nurture how best to make every person's experience, insight, and best ideas count. Leadership in the 21st century is indeed truly global. Everybody could and should count. That is at the heart of human security. Every human being needs protection, and best way to achieve this is through empowerment. We live in a highly interconnected world, marked by ongoing and far-reaching transformations. Change are occurring both gradually and abruptly, on different levels and multiple spheres. Today's security challenges are manifold with intricate, interwoven, and interdependent patterns. Dealing with ambiguities and dilemmas, learning from failures, managing complexity in international security policy and peace. All these challenges require critical thinking, imagination, innovative problem-solving skills, and a solid knowledge of today's multi-layered security environment. Heads of international organizations, NGOs, and foundations like the Geneva Center for Security Policy also have special obligations. Changes start with us. We have to practice what we say or teach. We have to lead by example, embrace the challenges, experiment, test, fail, and learn. Chart out a way to navigate the very complex environment. Innovate, do so in an inclusive manner, and be guided by empathy with the other, the less fortunate. We have to build a range of skills and attitude in our organizations, which have become essential fact for actors working in the field and the service of peace and security. First, to develop the need to develop our own and our organization's capacity for anticipation and adaptation. Second, the need to increase our sense of imagination, our creativity skills and curiosity. Third, the need to develop our personal resilience and the resilience of our organizations. And fourth, finally, to cultivate both individual and organizational learning agility. An agility that serves as the foundation for all the previous points. Too often, I hear that people are too busy to learn, and this is dangerous. We risk missing opportunities, neglecting preparation, making blunders. Most of us have a smartphone, and if we don't update its software, we will run into trouble, right? Such as security gaps and so on. So what do? We update our phones. But when was the last time that we updated our most important software, our brain, with the skills, the tools, and the appropriate attitude? COVID-19 has had a tremendous negative impact around the world, but it has also brought an almost unprecedented opportunity to think anew, to reflect, and to reprioritize. As I mentioned at the beginning of my intervention, global leadership in the new or next normal is not about fighting the problems. It is about together creating the solutions. Only together can we meet the exceptional and even daunting challenges that the world, humanity, and the planet are facing today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I was particularly struck by your call for personal responsibility, as well as the fact that we update our technologies to meet our market demands. And we've hardly updated our definition of security commensurate with the actual threats that we face. I was reflecting that 50 to 70% of our oxygen comes from phytoplankton, a single-cell organism in the oceans. And yet we don't have any major civil society or adequate government response to protecting our very breath of life that every human being needs. When the security model of the nation state was created, arising from the treaties of Westphalia, which was designed to stop the carnage in Europe over the definition of whose idea of Jesus' love was best, where Protestants and Catholics were slaughtering each other, we have really not updated our perspective appropriate to our technological impact on the natural world. So we're not protecting the oceans. We're not adequately protecting the climate. And I would say it's largely because we haven't updated our notion of security, that we haven't recognized that every other breath comes from the oceans. And the human security agenda addresses this holistic approach. It is exactly the idea needed to take us from a horse and buggy era of security concepts to the technologies appropriate to the modern world, the technologies of ideas that are appropriate. And one of these ideas that didn't exist when the treaties of Westphalia were created, but that we've since discovered is essential for good governance and the flourishing of human beings and society, is not just the application of the scientific method, but the application of fundamental human rights, that we have to understand the natural world and our duty to harmonize with the natural world based on hard science, but we have to harmonize amongst people on a daily life basis and internationally between nations. And nothing is more basic to that than human rights. So I'm very pleased now to introduce Elisabeth Tichy-Fisslberger, who is the ambassador of Austria to the United Nations office in Geneva, and she is the current president of the Human Rights Council. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. which at a time when most people's minds are on the corona crisis, makes us take a step back and think of the bigger picture. What kind of leadership do we need in the 21st century? And what is the essence of human security? With COVID and other crises, our world looks rather fragile. Critics of multilateralism have there been quick in putting all the blame on the failure of the multilateral system and the international governments, and some of them call for a return to national leadership. Let's think twice whether that sounds convincing. President Juan Manuel Santos of Colombia, who, as you may remember, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for the part he played in the peace process of his country, came to Geneva recently and said, among other things, if you want peace, you have to cultivate social justice. That does not sound so different from what President Roosevelt said in 1941 when he first started thinking about the United Nations. And he said there is no real freedom without economic security and independence. Human beings who are slaves of their needs are not free. Those who are hungry or have no jobs are the stuff dictatorships are made of. I guess since 1994, we have started to call this concept human security. And it is defined by 7 dimensions: economic security, food security, health, environmental security, personal security, community security, and political security. Peace is more than the absence of war. And security is a lot more than what the army and the police do. According to a study by the World Bank, the main source of conflicts is exclusion. And other studies have proved that societies that uphold human rights are more resilient, more sustainable, and more secure. I have the privilege, as you said, of presiding over the Human Rights Council this year, a body where we come across the nexus between human rights and peace and security all the time. And we see that the international community did all the right things in setting standards on human rights, the rule of law, and accountability. This brought about not only economic prosperity unheard of in previous years, but also social peace. In Europe, the creation of the European Union was based on the very idea that making war materially impossible by intertwining the economies would bring not only lasting peace, but also unprecedented prosperity. And that was on a continent which had spent the last 2,000 years fighting wars about borders, and it worked. Regardless of these success stories, we witness a kind of erosion of the trust in the multilateral processes. Very often this is a mistrust about what people call the elites, very often politicians, experts, scientists, sometimes the media, generally speaking, those who are perceived as being far away and suspected of not understanding the ordinary citizen. This erosion could be linked to what the World Health Organization has started to call an infodemic, an excessive information which, however, confuses and antagonizes people to the extent that they become easy prey to misinformation and rumors. One of the biggest challenges for the multilateral system in any case is to prove in how far it does make a difference to people's lives. There is a strange contrast between the increasingly higher standards which we are setting on all kinds of topics and the growing pushback against those standards on the ground, at least in some parts of the world. Roberto Saviano is an Italian author who became famous because he writes about organized crime to the extent that he has to live under police protection all around the clock. He developed what he calls the Kalashnikov index. And he says that just like there is a McDonald index, which tells us about the state of development in a country, there is a Kalashnikov index, which tells about the state of human rights. The cheaper the Kalashnikov, the less human rights. The human rights violations of today are, however, possibly the armed conflicts of tomorrow. This is why standards set by multilateral institutions such as the Human Rights Council, which intend to tangibly improve people's lives, are so important. And let me mention 3 examples among the so-called emerging subjects where I think that human rights-based approach would make all the difference. new technologies, climate change, and disarmament. Recent developments in new technologies have great promises for solving the problems and the biggest challenges of this world. But they also have the potential of becoming instruments for violating human rights, for example, by exercising control over people. Industry does not fancy standards. They thrive in the unregulated space around them. This is why the international community has to define some red lines. One example of doing this is the European Union 2018 Data Protection Regulation, the toughest privacy law in the world, which can cause harsh fines in the case of infringements. And even though it applies only to data related to people living in Europe, because of the wide outreach of the European market, that also puts pressure on companies worldwide. Another example, as I said, is climate change. The global climate emergency is perhaps the most profound planet-wide threat to our world ever since World War II. It impacts the right to life, to health, to food, to water, to shelter, to non-discrimination, to development, and to self-determination. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, recently pointed out that 40% of civil wars over the last 6 decades were linked to environmental degradation, 40%. And the special rapporteur of the UN advocates for an individual right to a healthy environment. This is a very difficult discussion among states. And of course, it includes the equally difficult discussion about what to do about the vaccines and the treatments, which we'll hopefully soon have for the corona pandemic, how to use them in a non-discriminatory and human rights-oriented way. These discussions will not go away for a long time. My third example is disarmament. There used to be a Cold War, post-Cold War consensus that weapons of mass destruction needed to be contained. Yet that consensus is eroding. We are confronted with a new generation of weapons which raise human rights concerns unheard of not long ago. Just think of drones or other autonomous weapons which cannot even distinguish between a school bus and a tank, or a soldier and a child. It is not very popular with powerful states, nor with the industry, to think about these problems. But the UN Human Rights Committee, a body established by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, made it very clear in 2018 that nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction, which are indiscriminate in effect and of a nature to cause destruction of human life on a catastrophic scale, are incompatible with the right to life. Against this background, disarmament treaties should be seen above all as a means to avoid the humanitarian consequences of weapons of mass destruction. My country was among the first and the fiercest advocates of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, with the main argument that the possession of nuclear weapons by a small number of countries meant unjustifiable risks for all the others. Granted, the existing multilateral structures could do with some reforms and need some brush up, but that doesn't mean that they have failed. On the contrary, today we see rather clearly that even the most powerful nation states cannot get a grip on climate change on their own, not on new technologies, and not on pandemics. Multilateralism is all about finding common ground to make the system work for the challenges of our time. That is not always a rewarding task. It can be very slow, it can be very cumbersome, but there is no real alternative. Here in Switzerland, we are told the story of General Dufour, who was a Swiss general in the middle of a civil war in the 19th century, and said after that, "I want to gain the peace." He understood that peace does not materialize by itself. And that finding hasn't changed in the last 150 years. This is where human security and peace building come in. The international legal texts on human rights reflect the basic idea that all men are equal in dignity and rights. Upholding that conviction is a lot more than a job for human rights defenders and activists. It is an investment into our societies and an insurance for our societies with a view to the future. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And thank you for highlighting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the importance of the rule of law. I just want to underscore that the International Court of Justice unanimously ruled that there is a duty to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons, and that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has within it the commitment of the nuclear weapon states to negotiate the elimination of those weapons. And nothing could be more basic than an international order of multilateralism than living up to legal obligations and living up to promises. Pacta sunt servanda, promises must be kept, is the very basic principle of all civilized conduct. And there is indeed an existing duty to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. And I want to just say thank you for the leadership that your country, Austria, has taken in advancing these principles. And congratulations, the treaty will enter into force at the very beginning of the coming year. I now have the privilege of introducing Professor Funmi, and please forgive me if I don't pronounce your last name correctly, Olonisakin. Please forgive me for that. She is both a scholar and a very practical advocate for everything we've been talking about. She's a founding member of the African Leadership Center and is presently a professor at King's College. Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Listen, let me start by thanking the organizers of this conference and acknowledging the excellent work and outputs that are emerging from the project already. I want to believe that they will continue to flow out of the underpinning project for some time to come. What I want to do here is to very briefly offer a combination of conceptual, policy, and global leadership practice to help transform, if you like, the still relevant ideals of human security. At the start of my own senior scholarship, this was something that I embraced a great deal, and I have deeply researched, but it seems as if there's a conundrum to be resolved somewhat, because we see a cyclical pattern in which we have not managed to transform the multilateral space. So I want to offer a combination of that conceptual, the policy, and global leadership practice that can help us transform this very relevant conversation. On the question of concept, much has been said about leadership and the vital importance of effective leadership that does not, on the one hand, silo one issue, but also is able to look at common agendas. We've heard that already from our speakers this morning, including in the introductory panel. I argue for simultaneous attention to governing life in common by focusing on what secures our collective aspirations to live well, live long, and to live in dignity, which is actually what are the key elements of the human security concept and agenda. Will boil down to in very practical ways. If you ask a whole group of people, students in my classroom, every year when you poll them, this is what their own notion of security for people really means. So focusing simultaneously, for example, on these elements means not privileging some issues over others, some groups as well over others. And we cannot secure, for example, one's right to food today, and also wait till tomorrow to secure their freedom from sexual violence, for example, and then the day after to secure the environment in which they have to live and thrive. I mean, I think that's the bottom line of taking an intersectional approach, if you like, to this whole notion of human security in terms of how we can practicalize it. But making this a reality, of course, requires no less than the transformation of the global leadership infrastructure and disrupting the very multilateral system as we know it for the better. That disruption has to look at the system for the better. So far, we have seen a multilateral order, but in fact also within the so-called states, where that engage in that multilateral system, for example. We have seen so much focus on the hardware of the leadership infrastructure, the systems, the institutions in which leadership is therefore performed, along with the technicalities of governance. And I think several speakers have alluded to this already. That's where we need to seek transformation, because so far there's been a limited focus on the relationships, hopefully relationships of trust between the managers of the hardware. And this is the software of the leadership infrastructure. We've seen little focus on the relationships between those who manage the space of our hardwares, whether it's a court system, whether it's, if you like, security system, whatever it is that is supposed to ensure human security, to guarantee it at the global level, whether it's a lot of the agencies that we work in, there's little relationship between the guardians of those spaces and the very people who live through peace, war, hunger, climate change, or wealth and prosperity, or if you like, disease and processes of rapid change. That is what is disconnected. And peace building, therefore, requires a recentering on both the local and global society's conversation with our governing elite, with the managers of the hardware of that leadership infrastructure. It will require no less than a rethinking of power and influence. And in particular, we need to really consider a diffusion of power. I know that really sounds too scholarly. Sometimes, it seems like it's impracticable, but it's not just a scholarly thing to think about power, the distribution of power. It's the reality of the world we live in. We need to acknowledge that those powers reside in particular places and not others. So what does diffusion look like? It requires distributed leadership be brought to the fore. It requires that we look at other bases of power outside of the space of the state, outside of national positional power, including voices and exercise of agency by the usually excluded silent majority about the collective aspirations to live well, to live long and in dignity. We have close to 2 billion people like this in the world, and they cannot be excluded, as our previous speaker rightly said, about exclusion being at the core of what makes peace fail at the end of the day. It has to be expressed in the daily realities of multilateral actors in addressing what matters today for humanity. And therefore, what matters today for humanity, which is this pandemic at this moment. We are seeing a test of effective global leadership in today's pandemic. We've already said in this forum and in other fora that we live in a truly interconnected world, and the pandemic has shown that. And the report that we discuss here today has really, really elevated that to the fore. We only have to see the pattern already. We're seeing a rush to secure a vaccine through bilateral agreements, which is very much a retreat to the old way of doing things. Today, we can begin to transform that global leadership infrastructure. If the most influential actors in the multilateral space truly observe the conversations and relationships between people and the governing elite, they will bring the difficult conversations to the fore of global attention. And if they did, question is, whose voice will they privilege? And this is the conundrum that the global leadership infrastructure must resolve today. We need to get real about applying those concepts. It means that we have to disrupt the multilateral arrangements as they stand, but disrupt them for the better in terms of who's allowed, whose voices are allowed in that space. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for reminding us of the principle that we have to apply justice, really. That's behind justice and caring to whatever agenda we go forward with, or otherwise we can't possibly succeed. I want to apologize to people who've come in expecting the normal translation capacity. The UN office in Geneva has done a marvelous job in facilitating and working for this conference, but because of the COVID crisis, some of the capacities are somewhat limited, and we've been unable to have the translations. But I want to assure everyone listening the extraordinary hard work of the UNOG in making this happen. And I guess I didn't thank the World Academy of Arts and Sciences enough because I feel part of it. But I want to particularly take this moment to express my gratitude, especially to Gary Jacobs for his leadership in making this happen. And another little housekeeping, Martin Griffith, he really brings to the fore his absence. He can't be here because he is the special envoy of the United Nations Secretary General for the crisis in Yemen. And if there ever was an example of the integration of all these issues and how it affects people's human security, we can see it in Yemen. From here's a geopolitical logjam in stopping this war, and it affects people on the ground, and it's a cycle of violence, and it's the common people that are hurt the worst. And if we had a global human security agenda, it would be a very different world. Our closing speaker, Ambassador Tibor TOTH, was the ambassador and permanent representative of Hungary to the United Nations. But I know him as someone who's done an enormous amount. I've observed over decades his enormous contribution to human security and global security. He was instrumental in bringing us the Biological Weapons Convention, and he chaired the negotiations for that treaty. He was instrumental in bringing us the Chemical Weapons Convention, banning chemical weapons, banning biological weapons. And he was and is presently the Executive Secretary Emeritus for the Preparatory Commission for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, where he was the executive director and created the over 300 monitoring stations over the whole planet, not only monitoring whether there's nuclear testing, but also whether there's earthquakes or tsunamis and the health of the whole planet. So his career is just an example of service to global human security. Ambassador Tibor TOTH, please, you will be our closing speaker. The floor is yours.
May I start with saying that the issue of leadership is bringing me to the question of transition leadership. And my feeling is that we have to more clearly look into the eyes of the problem or problems we are facing. The continued and renewed implementation of defining arrangements like the Paris Climate Agreement, like the SDGs from the nuclear area with which I'm more familiar, like the implementation of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the implementation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the strengthening, or the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, is not enough. These are needed steps forward, but it's not enough in itself. My feeling is that we might be sleepwalking with the unimplemented agenda and miss the need for a transition requirement, leadership. This time is different from the point of view of the challenges which are hitting us. We are facing a transition requirement which we haven't seen not just in decades, but for 3 or 4 generations. It's not just a crisis of the coronavirus, be it a public health or an economic challenge. And it's not just a combination of the 2008 financial economic crisis or the 2000 or the mid-1990s and the combination of that. It's a crisis of plural, which is cutting deep because of the unemployment, because of the generational aspects, because of the existential impact, because of what more recently we are seeing in developed OECD countries as well, because of the hunger and fear as a phenomenon coming back to even to these societies. And because of the moral crisis, not just at the individual, but at the collective level. And I'm sorry to say, but there is no quick recovery. As for these crisis elements, it's not just we are coming out with a V-shaped recovery from a financial meltdown. These are staying with us as for their impacts for generation. I would call a combination of this crisis in plural as an emerging super bubble, ready to be burst, with consequences which we do not grasp as it stands now. In addition, and underlying to these elements I mentioned, there is a new economy versus the old economy transition. The industries, the new industries like the Teslas, the new services like Facebook and Apple and Amazon and Google and so on, versus the old industry and old services with different interests and values, and what is more important, beneficiaries at the individual level and beneficiaries as countries or a coalition of countries. So when I say this time is different in a more negative way, it means that it's not just the old Cold War and deterrence type of problems. It's not just the old player frictions like between the United States or the Russian Federation. And it's not just even the new ascendants who are challenging the existing players. We are speaking, in addition to these elements, about tensions within the societies. Some are referring to them as cold civil war phenomena within societies. And historically, when this mix happened, and again, these transitions happened probably 3-4 generations ago, somewhere in the 1890s and 1900s, then unfortunately, as a lack of transition leadership, collectively, we ended up with a mix of civil wars, revolutions, and major wars. So this is the unfortunate challenge cut out for us right now, to make sure that one by one, we manage these crisis elements and we prevent this super bubble to burst. What we can do, number one, the cyclical phenomena in a situation like that historically was to remove and disintegrate the existing institutions. We cannot repeat what in the 1930s has been done to the League of Nations in Geneva. So we have to be counter-cyclical. We have to preserve the existing global multilateral arrangements and their leadership role. It will not be easy, it will be tough. We have to preserve the SDGs, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, nuclear disarmament, but we have to be ready that walking that path will be more difficult, because in a situation where we are, it's counter-cyclical to invest more in those areas. And the last point is, we need a transition leadership, recognizing that what we have been doing, the implementation of the unimplemented agenda, is not enough. So we have not just leadership in action, but a new leadership of thought for transition leadership. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much. We will hear over the next 2 days a variety of experts addressing the full scope of human challenges, from health to education to employment. But implicit in all of them is the importance of an integrated human security agenda. This is if you think of the current approach to security, the extraordinary allocations of money for nuclear weapons, the extraordinary expenses for the conventional armed forces, and the failure of appropriate allocations to protect our planet home and the billions of human lives on it. We must have a change. We must focus security on people. We must come to realize what science has told us, the way in which we are impacting the natural world is unsustainable. And the way in which we're attempting to provide security with weapons of mass destruction, which by accident, design, or madness could end human endeavor in an afternoon, is similarly unsustainable. We have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have the moral calling. It's time for all of us to raise our voices for the change. And as Ambassador Dussey pointed out, we ourselves have to be that change. I boil it down to love people and use things. Don't love things and use people. Thank you very much.